Hello and welcome to Runkle of the Bailey. My name is Ian Runkle. I'm a Canadian criminal defense and firearms lawyer. The most recent bombshell to hit the Canadian gun community is that a bunch of gun owners who legally bought firearms and actually had those purchases approved by the government have now been told that they accidentally bought illegal firearms and that they have to turn them in or destroy them. So this is causing a lot of consternation. I want to go through and explain what's going on. We're going to look at the notice of revocation and talk a little bit about options and what people can do and what this means. So what this refers to, and we've got here a notice of revocation, and I'll just point out the first thing that's interesting is that they sent out a notice of revocation at all. Because right now I'm in a court battle with them about whether they need to send a notice of revocation when a firearm is prohibited. They've said no in that court battle, but here clearly they understand that that is required because they're sending this notice out. So that'll be interesting. I'm going to see if I can introduce this into evidence. I may not be able to just because this is late evidence, but gonna try. All right. So this notice is to inform you that the firearm registration certificates for the firearms indicated below have been revoked pursuant to Section 71 of the Firearms Act. And they say the effective date of the revocation is shown in the top right corner of this page, which they have listed as October 5th, 2023. I believe everybody who got one of these has the same date, but I could be wrong. So what they're saying here is that your registration certificate, which again is the thing where they had to approve this transfer, is being revoked. It's being ended. Now it goes on to say you are required by law to return your firearm registration certificates without delay, either by mail to the address shown in the top left corner of this page or in person to a peace officer or firearms officer. You have 30 days to deliver your firearms to a peace officer, firearms officer, or chief firearms officer, or to otherwise lawfully dispose of them. So what does lawfully dispose of them mean here? Well, you could export them from the country. You could also potentially give them to somebody who has a permit that allows them to have the appropriate kind of firearm. In this case, they're saying that these are full auto, so that would probably have to go to a business. You could have them deactivated or destroyed. All of these things are potential options, but what they're not saying is a potential option is keeping the guns. However, because they've properly issued a notice, there is a challenge procedure. It says, please note that you may refer this matter to a provincial court judge within 30 days after receiving this notice. Note the after receiving this notice. Your time limit starts to run when this actually arrives, not when they send it or not when they, put the date of revocation. So your 30 days is when you actually get it. Now that could be an issue as to when that was in there. So if you are going to challenge this, keep in mind you've got deadlines. I'll also note that there is an option, or there is a possibility of challenging it after the 30 days. However, you don't want to be in a position where you have to do that. Filing deadlines are important. So if you're considering challenging this, I will implore you, please talk to a lawyer who's done these before, because this is not a place for amateurs. And one of the problems I'm having in my own challenge is that a bunch of people who challenged this before me and were just doing it on their own without any legal training actually have made things a lot worse by generating precedent that harms everybody. So this is not a place for amateurs, even though you can do these on your own. If you're going to fight them, get a lawyer who knows what they're doing. Very important. So they attach a copy of sections 74 to 81 of the Firearms Act. That's required as part of the notice. And those sections illustrate what you can do to challenge it. They note, if you refer this matter to a provincial court judge, you may keep your firearms and registration certificates until the outcome of the hearing. We'll talk about how the law works there, because there are some important things to consider. All right. So registration certificate number, and they have the make, the model, or the make, the type. So it's a Tavor rifle. And then they're going to give us the reasons why. And the reasons here are important to understand. So They say that they can revoke a registration certificate for any good and sufficient reason, and they note that you are not eligible to hold a registration certificate for a firearm unless you hold a license authorizing you to possess that kind of firearm, i.e., unless you hold a license allowing you to possess a prohibited full auto firearm. Now, this is exactly the thing that they said in my current case means that they don't have to issue a revocation at all. So the Canadian Firearms Program Specialized Firearms Support Services recently conducted a technical inspection of firearms imported by Canadian firearm businesses that were registered to businesses and individuals as the Tavor X95. It was determined that these firearms registered as the Tavor X95 model were in fact the Tavor X95 MSW model. So, a misidentification. The government is currently arguing with me that there is no real possibility of a misidentification, and yet here we are. The two models are different and technically distinct firearms. The Tavor X95 IWI US model, referred to above as the Tavor X95, is a purpose-built semi-automatic firearm available in either non-restricted or restricted versions and manufactured in the United States by IWI US. This is also a very popular firearm. Lots of them are out there. Lots of people own them. They're just a common sport shooting rifle. So, the Tavor X95 MSW model is a military surplus prohibited firearm imported from Israel and is a full automatic firearm. Now, as of the moment that I'm recording this, Israel is currently in conflict. I'm not going to make this video about that, but I'll just sort of note that. But this is, so what they're saying is they accidentally brought a bunch of full autos here, and because of a misidentification, these were allowed to be sold to the public. Now, the thing is, the people I've talked to who own these things have noted that they're converted to not be able to fire full auto. The problem is that converted full auto firearms are still banned in Canada, even if it's been modified, even permanently modified to not be able to fire full auto, it's banned in Canada. So assuming that the government is correct about these identifications, they would be correct that this is a prohibited firearm. The problem is that that leaves a lot of people who are completely innocent holding the bag, and that's not a great situation. So the verifiers acting on behalf of the Canadian businesses, now these verifiers actually are approved and certified and so forth by the Canadian government. They, it's not just like any idiot can decide, oh, I want to be a verifier. Like, I'm not an approved verifier. So the verifiers acting on behalf of the Canadian businesses misidentified these firearms, resulted in the prohibited Tavor X95 MSW being registered as the restricted Tavor X95. Now, this is really interesting because this is very... one of the things that's going on in my current court case is that they said, oh, well, we can infer that this is a banned model because the name of it is so similar. Well, you can see that that doesn't actually make sense. These Tavor X95 MSW firearms would not have been permitted entry into Canada had they been properly verified as prohibited firearms. There is no authority for a registration certificate to be issued in relation to this firearm. Therefore, your registration certificate is hereby revoked. Any questions regarding compensation should be directed to the supplier or distributor from whom you acquired the firearm, i.e. the government is saying, we're not paying you anything. We're not paying you. There is no compensation from the government end of things. So, one of the questions people have had a lot is, how do I go about getting compensation? If I've got to turn this in, where do I shouldn't be out the money on this because these were like $2,000 guns, and $2,000 is a lot of money, right? Most of us are not in a position to just go, no big deal about $2,000. I'm doing all right. I would still not be like, no worries about $2,000. That's a lot of money. So, people have said, can we sue the government about this? And the answer to that is basically no. No, you can't. The government is not going to be able to, I don't think that there's going to be a lawsuit here for suing the government. I don't see it as likely. So, that said, I could be wrong. I don't do a lot of civil lawsuits. So if you're considering that option, talk to somebody who does. I just think it's probably unlikely. There's going to potentially be lawsuits about, over people trying to sue the stores that they bought things from, saying, hey, I thought that this was, a legitimate gun and it's not. So there may be stores tied up in litigation now. People may also decide to start suing the verifiers. And so those verifiers might end up getting tied up in litigation. All of which is really bad for the Canadian gun community. Because the gun stores, if they get sued into oblivion, well, then they cease to exist and we don't have them. And that's not good. Similarly, verifiers are important because they're necessary for all sorts of things. And if it becomes too legally perilous for people to do the verifying work, which doesn't usually pay that much, just so you're aware, then maybe there aren't verifiers anymore, and that becomes a problem as well. So this is actually going to be a thing that has huge ripple effects within the community because a lot of people are going to be upset about this money, and it may end up causing some further problems on all of that. Now, they mentioned that you can keep the firearm if you challenge this. Now, again, if you're going to challenge this, please get a lawyer involved, somebody who knows what they're doing on this, at least if you intend to take it to a full hearing. I can tell you that there's probably going to be really difficult legal issues raised on this, and if you just do this on your own, there is a real possibility that you mess up the law for all Canadian gun owners. So be aware of that. Now, let's look at the section here that applies, because this is important. So this is from the Firearms Act, and it notes, if the applicant for or holder of the license or registration certificate, and we're talking about registration certificates here, refers the refusal to issue it or revocation of it to a provincial court judge under Section 74. So if you challenge this in court, the reasonable period of time, and that's the reasonable period of time for you to dispose of the registration certificates and the guns and all of that, does not begin until after the reference is finally disposed of. And so what that means is that you're just in abeyance there. And during that period of the reasonable period, and whatever that is, this is critical. So disposal of firearms. There's the reasonable period during which sections 91, 92, and 94 of the Criminal Code do not apply to the applicant or holder. This is because the law on this, the Firearms Act, as it's currently written, is designed with the notion of, hey, we got it wrong once. We already issued you a registration certificate and that was wrong. So while you're challenging us on these things, you should be able to maintain and to keep your firearms. Now, this is different from where there's a public safety issue, like an imminent public safety issue, because the current law says that if there's an imminent public safety issue, you can actually go and they can, amongst other things, kick down your front door and seize your guns and do that immediately. So these revocations aren't really for use for emergency safety issues. They're for use with this kind of thing. Like, we have a paperwork issue and we can fight this out in court because you've had this gun for years and there hasn't been a problem. We don't actually think you're unsafe with this gun, but we just want to make sure that, make sure everything's fine. However, one question people have had, or one thing people have said is, if I file a revocation, like a reference, I challenge this revocation, I can still use this gun. No, don't do that. And I'm going to explain why. This will get you into a lot of trouble. So you remember how it said section 91, 92, and 94. Let's break it down. We got to get into the law here to understand what is safe to do and what isn't. So section 91 is unauthorized possession of a firearm. So that's just having a gun without a license, or in the case of a restricted firearm, which these were classified as, or a prohibited firearm, which the government says that they're classified as, having it without a license and a registration certificate. So that you're protected. Section 92 is possession of firearm knowing its possession is unauthorized. And then 94 is unauthorized possession in motor vehicle. So the reason why they have the unauthorized possession in motor vehicle section, why this section exists, is because a lot of the time there will be like 4 guys in a car and 1 rifle, and this just means that they can charge everyone in the car. But one of the critical sections that is not exempted here is, we'll just scroll up a little bit, possession at unauthorized place. Now, possession at unauthorized place is the thing where you need an authorization to transport in order to take your gun to and from the range. Now, there is a very real possibility, and I say possibility because I can't guarantee one way or the other, but if you were found with one of these guns at the range or traveling to or from any of a number of places, they may very well say, listen, you are being charged under section 93. So if you are one of the people who has these guns, even during the reasonable notice period, do not take it to a gun range. Do not take it anywhere to go shooting with. I know that this is not what you want to hear. I know that this is not what you'd like to be thinking, but there is very real risk that you end up getting charged under this section, and then I'm going to tell you, it's debatable as to whether or not you can and can't be convicted. And specifically, it may come down to the specific wording on your specific authorization to transport. So, you end up in a situation of interesting legal questions, and the question may actually be different from one person to another person. This means that you are going to be in an area where you are going to face charges, and if you're charged under this section, they will seize every gun you own pending those charges. All of those will be on the hook, because if you're convicted, they will then try to keep those guns. You won't get them back. And they would also ban you from using guns at all. And I'll just note, it's hunting season right now. It's a bad time to have them take all your guns. So that's just for being charged. You should also expect to spend at least $10,000 defending this. And that's at least. We're talking like bottom barrel rates. And you can buy a whole new gun to go target shooting with for 10 grand. It is not it's not a sensible way for you to spend your money. You do not want to end up being the test case for this. So avoid this entirely. Now, this is just a YouTube video. We don't have a legal relationship. I'm not going to give you legal advice. If you are considering this, talk to a lawyer directly, because as noted, I can't look at your authorization to transport. I can't look at any of those documents just to confirm your specific situation. But you should be aware, just as an information thing, this is a legally risky activity. So even if you are challenging this in court, and again, you should have a lawyer for that, you would want to just keep this in a safe, not doing anything in the meantime. And I know that sucks, but I'm not here to give good news. I'm here to give accurate news. All right, so I guess that's our first video on this topic. We're getting a little long here. There's going to be lots of other questions. On Monday, I do a live stream. I expect that there's going to be people with questions on this topic. Feel free to pop in there. If you leave questions in the comments below, or if you reach out to me with questions, I will probably do follow-up videos on this one because it's going to be interesting. So Anyway, thank you guys for joining me. I wish I had better news, but is what it is. Hopefully this has provided a little bit of explanation at least. And for those of you who aren't in Canada, you can see just what it's like being a Canadian gun owner. These are people who legally bought their guns from gun stores, were provided with every assurance that these were legal guns, including from the government, because the government said, yes, we consider these to be restricted firearms, which you can own. Here is a certificate authorizing you to own this gun. Here are permissions to take it to the range and all sorts of things. I know if you're in the States, you don't need all that stuff, but yeah. And now they're saying, oops, we made a mistake. So you lose your property and it's not going to cost us anything. Fun times. So yes, please hit the like button, share, subscribe, all of those things. It really does help. Leave your comments if you have more questions below, or if you just have thoughts. I also want to thank my Patreon supporters at the $50 level: CCFR, Canada's National Firearms Association, the Canadian Shooting Sports Association, and Lembas for the Elf. I love that. And at the $20 level, Lindsay Metcalf, Larry Kalniak, Here's a Coin Legal Witcher, Cameron Johnson, Andrew Elsich, Vicky, and Dorky Dane. Thank you as well to my $10 supporters who will be in the crawl immediately following. Thank you for watching. Hope this has armed you with knowledge. See you next time.